and welcome to the Oddity Archive, the show that keeps you up to date with all the latest toys for all the hottest devices. Today, we're going to take a look at some of the sweetest toys to trick out, and not to mention max out the performance of, your brand new VCR. Sold separately.
A 6-hour Select-O-Vision.
Ah, the new video cassette recorder from RCA.
Yeah.
Go on, buy one.
Better wait till the price comes down.
In 1977, the first VHS decks, in the US at least, were released. And for a while, advancements and accessories seemed to be a non-issue. Of course, it didn't hurt that the early adoption rate of the VCR was a bit low. However, by the mid-80s, thanks in part to the format wars, prices on VCRs, particularly the more widely licensed VHS system, dipped below the $300 point. In the wake of this, video releases and stores didn't just take off, but also a glut of accessories designed to aid users in the use and maintenance of their machines suddenly flooded the market.
Are you bringing the VCR up to the bedroom?
Daddy, we want the VCR in the family room.
In 1985, faced with the dilemma of having a mere one VCR and/or cable box in each household, Santa Monica, California-based Rabbit Systems gave viewers the option of being able to broadcast, so to speak, their machines to every TV in a house. This was called the VCR Rabbit. Initially, the VCR Rabbit was a wireless transmitting device used in tandem with standalone receivers. These units claimed a solid reception rate at up to a 150-foot radius. Alas, I don't have a unit to test, so I can't confirm that. Anyway, the product was quickly pulled from shelves after the FCC, rather belatedly, deemed the system to count as a full-on, unlicensed broadcast. In June of the following year, Rabbit Systems took another stab at the VCR Rabbit, this time in a wired model, which meant physically linking the transmitter and receiver, or receivers, together via speaker wire, which sometimes entailed drilling holes in the walls. Needless to say, the wired version never caught on.
When you want to tape your favorite shows, does it turn into a big production?
When I was growing up, one joke to come out of every lousy stand-up comedian was on how they couldn't figure out how to set their VCRs. Perhaps in response, the powers that be attempted to stem the tide of the great unwashed VCR illiterate with the VCR Plus. Now, you might remember that for over 20 years, local newspapers and TV Guide both had sets of numbers next to each program in their TV listings. This was for use with VCR Plus. Anyway, the idea was that you could simply punch in the show's code on your special, dedicated remote, and your show would automatically, magically record.
VCR is a pain to program, and get rid of it. And get the one from RCA with VCR Plus built in.
But of course, most folks remember the later version of VCR Plus, which was built into a lot of VHS decks during the 90s, and that not very many people used. Indeed, my trusty old 1998 RCA has it built in, but I digress. VCR Plus was a good idea on paper, but it had some problems. Both the standalone and built-in versions required some serious programming. Each channel would have to be linked to an, if you will, virtual VCR Plus channel, and heaven forbid you used a standalone VCR Plus because you had to dig through a pile of codes to, hopefully, sync the remote with your VCR. Needless to say, regardless of which version you used, if you couldn't program your VCR, you definitely couldn't program VCR Plus. The last VCR Plus codes went out in May of 2010. I'm going to drag out this segment just a little bit more here, simply because I can. So if you'll indulge me, I'd like to take just a little stroll down memory lane here, and I, believe it or not, actually do have something of a history with VCR Plus. And as I mentioned in that little history lesson there, that my 1998 RCA VHS deck has VCR Plus built in, and I am the original owner of that thing. But at the time, even though I was fully capable of programming a VCR, just because I thought it was going to be some cool high-tech thing, I nevertheless attempted to use VCR Plus a few times. And as I recall, aside from the horrendous initial setup, that it was really just the most inflexible thing in the world. I mean, you'd record a show, but you couldn't tweak it. So it would be, say, from 8:30 to 9. It would be on at 8:30, off at 9, period. But as we all know, the networks aren't quite that reliable, so I mean, even these days, I like to build in a few minutes on both sides of the recording just to try and make sure that nothing gets lost. But as I recall, you could not do that with the VCR Plus. And needless to say, I went back to just the normal way of programming the VCR pretty quickly. So, one other, just brief little point of business here. I, for reasons unknown, actually have one of the original late 80s, early 90s VCR Plus remotes. And I'm sure if this were the 90s or 2000s, I could test this thing out and it would work wonderfully and everybody would be happy, but probably not so much now. I mean, yeah, I could probably try and come up with a bogus code just to see if it records anything, but I'm too lazy, and I have a bunch of other topics to cover today, so back to business.
As Roger repeats it over and over and over, the technology is not my bag. I have yet to successfully program a VCR. I think I wear that as a badge of honor. And this year, there's yet another product for people who have the same problem. It's called the VCR Voice Programmer, and I tested it out.
In 1992, the next attempt at helping out the hapless VCR programmer came out of the woodwork. This time out, there were no codes involved, just your voice.
Okay, let's see if the VCR Voice Programmer really works. I'm going to press, see if it really recorded our show. Here we go. Press the VCR button and then say the magic word. Play.
I think if you push the tape in, Gene, it will probably work better. Okay, now why don't you try it again?
That really does help, huh?
This was the so imaginatively named VCR Voice Programmer. This was available for $169 and could be trained to recognize up to 4 user voices. Yes, you heard me right, true voice recognition. Anyway, the makers of the VCR Voice Programmer were allegedly in talks with Philips, MAGNAVOX in the US, to have voice programming built into their higher-end VCRs. For one reason or another, it never happened, though they ultimately did manufacture some of the remotes. Like VCR Plus, the VCR Voice Programmer had its drawbacks, most notably the fact that you had to hit the voice button on the remote before doing any further tasks, rendering such basics as play and stop a bigger task than they already were. Also, the remote always had to have a direct view, if you will, of the VCR to work as well. The VCR Voice Programmer was discontinued around 1994.
Problems recording your favorite TV show? Let the VCR Copilot take over. The easy, fast way to record your favorite shows.
This last VCR programming remote is something of a personal favorite of mine. This is basically the AV equivalent to one of those timers that people use when they go on vacation. I'm talking about the VCR Copilot. Introduced in roughly 1998 and discontinued around 2004, though there is no shortage of new old stock of these things, the VCR Copilot is about as simple as these devices ever got, which isn't saying much. When you first get the remote, you need to set it for the current time of day, and then reset for those twice annual daylight savings changes. And then to use it, you turn on your VCR and set it to whatever channel you wanted to record on. You enter the day of the week with a switch on the remote, then you set the start time in 10-minute increments with the top knob, then you set the end time also in 10-minute increments with the bottom knob. You leave the remote pointed at the VCR, and come record time, the remote cycles through the 77 most common record codes on VCRs. Assuming your VCR reacts to one of the 77 magic codes, the VCR Copilot does the rest.
Available at Walgreens, Osco, participating Ace, and True Value. We're shooting this with a JVC compact VHS camcorder. The gentleman we're watching is trying to play an 8mm camcorder tape on his VCR. Look at the detail, the sharp, clean image. Here, of course, not on his TV.
In 1982, in an attempt to give camcorder users an alternative to the cumbersome, then new VHS camcorders, the VHS Compact, or VHS-C, was introduced. VHS-C uses the same tape stock as the standard VHS, but is encased in a much smaller cartridge. It took nearly a decade, but eventually the sales of VHS-C camcorders eclipsed those of the standard VHS units. Thing was, for quite some time, to play back the VHS-C tape on your TV, you had to hook up your camcorder. Now, sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, a pair of adapters, one automatic, one manual, hit the market, allowing users to stick their VHS-C tapes into their usual VCRs. The automatic ones were powered via usually 1 or 2 AA batteries. Now, I used to own one of these, until it choked, with a tape inside. I had to physically dismantle and partially destroy it to retrieve the tape. Needless to say, I do not recommend these. For those with old VHS-C tapes that want to see them again or transfer them or whatever, I personally do not recommend using the camcorder as a transfer method. I would rather actually see people use these adapters, and preferably the manual ones, because there's a lot fewer moving parts. You know, if something goes wrong, getting the tape out's a lot easier. So I just thought I would share mine, and unfortunately these things aren't getting any easier to come by, but I thought I'd just give a quick little demo here. You got this little drawer here. You pull it down. You put your tape in, which it lays flat, and then you just pop it in. It starts to let it out, and then you just close the drawer, which does the rest for you, because it brings down the 2 little rollers that go through any tape. So it takes them out, and there you go. And before you stick it in, just take the tape itself and rewind it with your finger till it stops, which is usually only a quarter to half a turn. Pop it in, watch it. You're good. And then to take it all apart, it's pretty much just the opposite. You got the drawer, you open it, you pop out the tape from underneath, and you close the drawer. Nice and simple. So anyway, on to today's final topic, and true to form, I have saved the most nostalgic one for last. So without further ado, it's...
No matter how much you fill with video thingamabobs and whatchamajigs, you still won't have the best picture possible if you have dirty VCR heads.
There really isn't much to say about these things, as the name ought to be plenty self-explanatory. These tapes were introduced in the mid-80s and were initially available for both VHS and Betamax systems. The Betamax tapes went away within a few years, but the VHS ones held on until the VHS format stopped being a going concern. We're talking early to mid-2000s. Now, you had 2 types of head cleaning tapes. First, you had the dry tapes, and these were coated with something or other, and sometimes included system tests.
Stereo audio test, left channel. Stereo audio test, right channel.
Then you had the wet tapes, which were just standard blank tapes that you treated with some sort of included alcohol-based solution, then played all the way through. Now, my parents used to swear by the dry tapes, but to be honest, functionally speaking, I'm not really a fan of either type of cleaning tape. I don't think they clean so much as they just rearrange the dirt. Yeah, I'm one of those crazy people that dismantles VCRs to clean them. Anyway, at this point, these tapes are, again, functionally speaking, pretty much worthless. Because, 20 to 30 years later, the coating on these tapes is pretty well gone. Now, I only have one of these tapes left in my possession, a dry tape that belonged to my parents, which I believe was purchased in 1989, which you may have already seen a few seconds of, which I'm gonna make you watch again. largely because I potentially sacrificed one of my VCRs to do so, and I'm gonna get my money's worth. Enjoy. And that's it for this admittedly rather elementary edition of the Oddity Archive. Join us next time when I, quite flamboyantly, clean the heads of all my VCRs via broadcast via the VCR Rabbit. It will work. Oh yes, it will work. Oh, who am I kidding?
What a rebate. What a deal. What a steal.